When it comes to the restoration and protection of valuable archaeological discoveries, the archaeological community is divided. Historical artifacts and ancient structures are extremely fragile, they can never be reconstructed after being disturbed, and they can never be replaced after being lost. Number 10. The Pyramid of Egypt. The Pyramid of Djoser, thought to be Egypt's first stone pyramid, was only recently reopened to the public after a meticulous and painstaking restoration that took more than 14 years and $6.6 million to complete. Legend has it that Imhotep, the architect, planned and oversaw the construction of the 60-meter structure nearly 4,700 years ago, the world's first perpendicular tomb for Pharaoh Djoser. From the outside, the pyramid appears to be a compact mountain of stone. The interior is a void of over 3 miles, 4.8 kilometers, of walkways made of over 11.6 million cubic feet, 328,500 cubic meters, of stone and clay. In fact, its complicated interior inevitably jeopardized its structural integrity over time, while the earthquake that struck Cairo in 1992 nearly destroyed its foundation. Airbags designed by structural engineers were placed across the most vulnerable sections of the pyramid to ensure structural safety during the restoration. Steel rods were also run through its steps like rebar to help keep its shape. The restoration teams were able to repair the corridors and ceilings while introducing a new framework for interior lighting. Thanks to these distinct approaches to fortification, they also made 1 or 2 modern updates to the structure to make it more accessible to people with disabilities. Number 9. Somnath Temple, India. Lord Shiva is said to have manifested as a pillar of fire at the 12 Jyotirlingas or Jyotirlingam. One of the 12 is housed at the Somnath Temple in Gujarat, India. As such, it is a popular tourist destination as well as a sacred religious site. The temple was repeatedly rebuilt and restored throughout history as a result of its destruction by numerous invaders and their subsequent rule. After being demolished in October 1950, the current temple was rebuilt and relocated to a new location a few miles away. Temples in India have a long history of destruction and restoration. The restoration of the Somnath Temple was hailed as a shining example of India's superiority in the power of restoration over power following rule. After being demolished in October 1950, the current temple was rebuilt and relocated to a new location a few miles away. Temples in India have a long history of destruction and restoration. The Somnath Temple restoration was hailed as a shining example of India's superiority when it came to the power of restoration over the power of devastation. Political leaders saw its restoration as restoring national pride because it occurred shortly after India gained independence from Britain. Number 8. The Petra Complex, Jordan. Films such as Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade and Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen have popularized the Petra ruins. Petra, which was abandoned in the 6th century, was built in a seismic zone, making it vulnerable to damage from floods and earthquakes. The site was also under significant threat at the end of the 20th century due to the constant influx of tourists. Petra was placed on the World Monuments Fund's watch list in the 1990s in an attempt to address tourism management issues. The World Monuments Fund, Jordan's Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities, and the Petra National Trust collaborated to create a long-term site plan. A number of projects, in addition to other studies, resulted in the restoration of the magnificent Great Temple, several of the columns, the entrance gorge, and the Byzantine church, as well as the reconstruction of the site's ancient water canals. Number 7. Temple of Borobudur, Indonesia. Borobudur, which was built between the 8th and 9th centuries AD, was abandoned seemingly overnight in the 1500s. The Borobudur complex contains 3 historical sites, the Borobudur Temple and 2 smaller temples built on a horizontal plane to the east of Borobudur. The 2 small temples are known as the Pul Temple and the Mendip Temple. Due to volcanic activity, the site was covered in ash over time, and Java's plant life eventually covered the historic ruins. In 1814, the then English governor, Thomas Stamford Raffles, began operations to locate and reclaim the site. It took his team more than 2 months to find the temples. UNESCO began an international campaign in 1972 to restore the illustrious Buddhist temple to its former glory. After 11 years, the restoration work was completed in 1983. Historians rebuilt the temple in 2 stages, using existing materials from the site. Almost all of the existing materials on the site were used, with only minor additions to strengthen and reinforce the structure and allow adequate water runoff, which did not compromise the site's integrity or value. Number 6. The Sistine Chapel frescoes, the Vatican City. Pope Sixtus IV authorized the construction of the Vatican's iconic Sistine Chapel, which is located just north of St. Peter's Basilica, and it was completed around 1481. The chapel is famous around the world for its collection of priceless art masterpieces. In fact, several famous artists, including Botticelli and Perugino, who were among the most illustrious Renaissance artists of all time, contributed significantly to the artworks that can be found on the walls inside the chapel. Pope Julius II commissioned Michelangelo to decorate the ceiling, which he did from 1508 to 1512. Michelangelo's glorious portrait of the Last Judgment, painted in 1541, was sanctioned by Pope Clement VII. Michelangelo's works are regarded as some of the most remarkable works of Western art ever created. The Sistine Chapel's artworks, specifically the ceiling and concomitant apertures by Michelangelo, have undergone several restorations over the years, the most recent of which took place between 1980 and 1994. Its most recent restoration wowed both art lovers and art historians, revealing colors and details never before seen. Many argue that as a result, every book ever written about Michelangelo's techniques will have to be revised. In short, it means a reevaluation of his style, color use, and art form as a whole, which will most likely result in a new vision of his brilliance of the High Renaissance, arguably Western art's best period. Number 5. Karnak Temple Complex, Egypt. The ancient Karnak Temple precinct was located on the eastern bank of the Nile River in Thebes and covered an area of more than 247 acres, 1 square kilometer, known as Luxor today. The construction at the site began over 4,000 years ago and continued indefinitely until the Romans besieged Egypt and took control around 2,000 years ago. What distinguishes Karnak from the other temple sites in Egypt is the length of time it was in use and actively being developed. Evidence suggests that at least 30 pharaohs contributed to the site, allowing it to achieve size, sophistication, and variability not found elsewhere. Rising water tables and chemical deterioration directly related to agricultural irrigation in the area have created many new preservation concerns over the last 100 years. Because the majority of the building facades and other surfaces contain hieroglyphs and relief carvings, this degradation causes significant damage to the historical evidence, jeopardizing the site's stability and compromising historians' ability to gather context and meaning. Over the last few decades, several groundbreaking techniques, including the use of lime mortar, have been used to restore many of the temples, pillars, walkways, and statues on the site. The most notable of these were the restorations of Luxor Temple and the Amun-Re precinct, the Temple of Khonsu's painted chapels and the ongoing restoration of the 29 ram statues in the first courtyard. Number 4. The Parthenon, Greece. The Parthenon is the epitome of Greek architecture and is considered one of the most important surviving buildings from antiquity. Apart from being Athens' central religious hub, its sculptures, statues, and other works of art have never been replicated and remain some of the finest examples of Greek sophistication and refinement. The Parthenon, which was built around 500 BC, was a symbol of wealth, power, and success and is still one of the most well-known structures in the world today. When the Greek government decided to take significant action to restore the rapidly deteriorating structures in the 1970s, the Acropolis Restoration Project was born. The committee meticulously mapped out every artifact and remnant in the rubble and used 3D mapping techniques to determine their original location. Although this restoration is still in progress, The restoration team intends to enhance original Parthenon objects with exciting new components wherever possible in order to maintain the site's integrity while remaining water and corrosion resistant. They will also use new marble from the original quarry site to complete the restoration in order to maintain the building's original look and feel. It will not, however, be completely restored. Instead, it will be left as a partial ruin to showcase its distinctive features and significant history. Number 3. The Vasa Museum, Sweden. In this day and age, rescuing and displaying any historically significant shipwreck to the general public is no small task. One of the best examples, however, can be found at the Vasa Museum in Stockholm, one of Sweden's most popular tourist destinations. The Vasa was King Gustav Adolphus' custom warship that sank in 1628 on its maiden voyage after a gust of wind toppled the ship on its side. As it flooded, the ship sank into the shallow waters of Stockholm's harbor, where it remained until 1956, 328 years later. From 1959 to 1961, the battered ship was salvaged and sent to a storage facility. It is a difficult task in this day and age to rescue and display any historically significant shipwreck to the general public. One of the best examples, however, can be found at Stockholm's Vasa Museum, one of the country's most popular tourist destinations. The Vasa was a custom warship built for King Gustav Adolphus that sank on its maiden voyage in 1628 after a gust of wind toppled the ship on its side. The ship sank into the shallow waters of Stockholm's harbor as it flooded, where it remained until 1956, 328 years later. The battered ship was salvaged and sent to a storage facility between 1959 and 1961. Number 2. The Terracotta Army, China. Although most of us have heard of or are familiar with the impressive terracotta warriors that were unveiled in China in 1974, few realize that they were not discovered in their entirety. The total number of terracotta warriors varies because the site is still being excavated and new discoveries are being made. In fact, only one of the nearly 8,000 warriors known to us was discovered. Archaeologists have discovered over 600 pits so far in the network of large underground caverns. Although the majority of the pits remain unexcavated for the time being, 3 very large pits were enclosed within the Terracotta Army Museum, which is now one of China's most popular tourist attractions. Each exposed pit on display is one of a kind. One pit contains perfectly reassembled warriors standing in formation, while another pit depicts the warriors as they were discovered, toppled and cracked. The command post is represented by the third pit, which is the smallest. Number 1. The Archaeological Park of Pompeii, Italy. Although the restorations at Pompeii deserve their own list, we thought we'd highlight some of the work done so far. Since coordinated archaeological digs began in the 18th century, the tombs, rich dwellings, and public spaces of Pompeii have been ransacked by robbers and, in some early cases, restored so ferociously as to ruin the original remains. The Italians declared a year-long state of emergency for Pompeii in 2008. Following a flood of negative publicity, the European Commission jumped on board and approved €105 million, about $116 million, in funding to secure the site. One of the first major recommendations was to protect everything that had already been excavated. A third of the archaeological site is still underground. Laborers worked tirelessly to stabilize the ancient buildings and stone walls, restore frescoes, and install new stormwater runoff systems to redirect rainwater. Numerous surveillance cameras were also installed throughout the ancient city to protect the hundreds of daily visitors. Overall, the project enabled more than 12,077 square meters of the archaeological site to be restored and reopened to tourists, including Julia Felix's estate and over 36 other structures.